in how we live, move, learn, work, and play. For more information about the Planning Commission, please call 813-272-5940. Follow us on social media or visit our website at planhillsborough.org.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the November 18th, 2019 regular meeting of the Hillsborough County City-County Planning Commission. We thank you for attending this meeting. Your comments and participation are encouraged. Please sign the register at the rear of the room and turn off any devices that may be a distraction. If you wish to address the Commission on agenda items, we ask that you please complete the appropriate public comment sign-in sheet at the back of the room. When addressing the Commission, please state your name, address, and speak directly into the microphone. For those of you who are not familiar with our process, the meeting will be conducted as follows. The agenda item will be introduced. Staff will give their presentation with a 15-minute time limit. The applicant will be given the opportunity to make a presentation with a 15-minute time limit. Following presentations, members of the public may address the Planning Commission when recognized by the chair. Public comment will be heard for 3 minutes per person. The applicant will be afforded a 3-minute period for rebuttal or response. Planning commissioners will ask questions. Public comment will be closed. Then upon a motion, a second, and discussion, a vote will be taken. With that introduction, I'll ask Commissioner Dix to lead us into prayer and pledge of allegiance. All stand.
Dear Lord, we want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today and for the many blessings that you have bestowed upon us, particularly as we go into the Thanksgiving season. We have so much to be thankful for, not the least of which is to live in a country where we are permitted to be governed by the people. And we take that responsibility seriously here, and as well as do many other bodies who are organizing today. Guide us, give us wisdom and strength to make the right decisions for the right issues. Watch over us and help us. Keep us safe throughout the holidays. It is in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Attention, salute, pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner Dix. Roll call, please.
Dickerson? Rodriguez?
Here.
Burstein?
Here.
Powell? Kress?
Here.
Green?
Present.
Dowdy?
Here.
Thrower?
Here.
Joseph?
Here.
Dix?
Here.
Marino?
Here.
Cardenas?
Here.
Thank you. You have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. I did want to mention that Commissioner Powell had a family emergency. That's why he's not here. I wanted to mention that because his name is on the ballot for some of the items, and it was staff notified me that it was a family emergency, and I wanted everybody to be aware of why he was not present. So, moving on to the next item is approval of the minutes for the regular meeting and the Hillsborough County Plan Amendment meeting from October 14th, 2019. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Marino, second by Commissioner Green. Any discussion before we vote? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Minutes are approved as stated. Thank you. Next, we have our two new commissioners, Stephen Bernstein and Giovanni Cardenas, take the oath of office. Commissioner, or Mr. Robin?
The clerk.
Or the clerk?
Clerk.
Yep.
Could you two please stand? Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I.
Aye.
Your name.
Giovanni Cardenas,
A Planning Commission appointee
Planning Commission appointee,
of the Tampa City Council. Do solemnly swear or affirm
solemnly swear or affirm
that I will faithfully perform the duties of my appointed office and will support and honor
support and honor
to the best of my ability all applicable laws of the state of Florida, the city of Tampa, as well as the bylaws, beliefs, vision, mission,
vision and mission,
policies, procedures, and standards
policies, procedures, and standards,
of conduct of the Hillsborough County City-County Planning Commission.
conduct of the City Planning Commission.
I hereby, through this oath, affirm that I will perform the duties
affirm that I will perform the duties
of this public trust
of this public trust
in a fair, equitable, and ethical manner,
in a fair, equitable, and ethical manner,
befitting the dignity and responsibilities
with dignity and responsibility
responsibilities
of the office.
of the office.
Congratulations. Would you like to, I'll start with Commissioner Cardenas. Would you like to introduce yourself and say a few words?
Sure. Should I stand or is that?
Oh, you can say, microphone.
Giovanni Cardenas, involved in commercial and residential real estate here in Tampa. Pretty involved in different organizations throughout town, and I just wanted to take that to the next level and really become part of our city and county and where we're growing to.
Okay, welcome, congratulations.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bernstein?
Yeah, my name is Steve Bernstein. I'm a regional managing partner of the law offices of Fisher Phillips. Been active in my community since I was lucky enough to move down here 11 years ago from Atlanta. And it's humbling and an honor to be a part of this process and to have an opportunity to work with my colleagues up here and to hear from the public on matters of public importance when it comes to planning for the future of our county and our city.
Okay,
Both can please sign those and hand them back to the meeting.
yep. Well, congratulations, welcome.
Thank you.
Next up is our election of officers. Everybody should have the statement of interest summary form in front of you. If you don't, please let me know. The statement of interest is from the last meeting. We went through and discussed it. Before you vote, I did want to ask, we can open it up. If anybody would like to submit their name or is interested in a position, we can take names from the floor for this. Any interest on any of the positions?
Let's do that
Mr.
on an
Robin?
office by office basis.
Okay, yeah, I'll do it office by
I think
office.
it might be easier if you would announce
Okay.
those that have had the expressed interest
Yep.
and are the presumed nominees.
Okay.
I think it'll be
Yeah,
easier.
I'll go through that. For chairman, we have Commissioner Dix, Commissioner Joseph, and Commissioner Thrower. Is there any interest from anyone else? Okay. Yeah, we'll do that. If you'd like to vote on the chairman, and the ballots should be right in front of you. Vote, and once you've voted, Mr. Robin, Attorney Robbins, will pick them up.
Please be sure to include your name on them.
Okay.
Thank you.
What, for the chair?
Yeah, please. It'll be easier.
Okay.
We'll let Attorney Robin calculate it right now because there are individuals who express interest for the chair. If they don't get the chair position, they can still run for the vice chair. So we'll wait and see how this plays out.
Okay, I have a write-in vote from Commissioner Kress for Commissioner Joseph. I'm sorry, I should just add that to the stack, excuse me. I have votes for Commissioner Joseph from Ms. Kress, Mr. Green, and Mr. Dowdy. 3 votes. I have votes for Commissioner Dix from Commissioners Bernstein and Dix. And I have, let's see, I have votes for Commissioner Thrower from Commissioners Marino, Joseph, Thrower, and Cardenas. I think I butchered that.
No, that's fine.
So I have 4 votes for Commissioner Thrower, 3 for Commissioner Joseph, and 2 for Commissioner Dix. So we're going to need to do another round.
I'm good with a plurality rather than majority, if you're good with that, Nigel, because you have.
Yeah, I'm good with Mitch being the chair again.
But I would then move by acclamation that you become the chairman for the following year.
Okay.
Second that.
All in favor of that motion?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, thank you. We will move to the vice chair. Those who have expressed interest, Commissioner Joseph, Commissioner Powell, and I had expressed interest, so you can cross my name out. Commissioner Thrower, are there anyone from the floor that'd like to submit their name for the vice chair position? No one from the floor, please vote.
Well, we have a unanimous ballot for Commissioner Joseph. Congratulations.
Congratulations, Commissioner Joseph. Next up, member at large. We have, you can take Commissioner Joseph's name off that list and Commissioner Thrower's name off that list. We have Commissioner Dowdy, Commissioner Marino, and Commissioner Powell. Is there anyone from the floor that'd like to submit their name? If not, Commissioner Marino?
I would remove myself from this one.
Okay. So we have Commissioner Dowdy and Commissioner Powell.
Okay, I have one ballot for Commissioner Powell from Commissioner Kress, and the remaining 8 ballots are all for Commissioner Dowdy.
Congratulations. Okay. Now we have 2 remaining, the MPO member and the MPO alternate. The MPO member, we have Commissioner Green and Commissioner Marino, who have submitted their names as interested in the position. Is there anybody else from the floor who would like to submit their name for the MPO member? Appointees, please vote.
If you want to give me both those at the same time, since I think,
No, they
Actually,
oh,
can't.
there, I'm sorry, it's a different list, isn't it? All right.
Yeah.
Thought maybe I could speed that up. Just real fast. Sorry.
He's up the other shelf. Okay. He saw you.
Thank you. Okay, I have 4 votes for Commissioner Green from Commissioners Green, Dowdy, Joseph, and Dix. And I have 5 votes for Commissioner Marino from Commissioners Thrower, Marino, Bernstein, Cardenas, and Kress. So congratulations to Mr. Marino.
Okay, congratulations. For the MPO alternate, we have Commissioner Dowdy and Commissioner Kress who've expressed interest. Commissioner Marino, you can cross his name off the list since he got the MPO seat. Anyone from the floor like to submit their name for the MPO alternate?
Actually,
He's gone too.
I would like to remove my name and suggest that Trent be considered for the alternate. Commissioner Green.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Trent, are you interested?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay.
I'm fine if he just does it, honestly.
You'd like to remove your list?
Yeah,
name?
that's fine.
Okay. Well, so we have Trent Green, Commissioner Green, yeah, by acclamation. Would someone like to make a motion just to,
So motion.
motion by Commissioner
Second.
Joseph, a second by Commissioner Dowdy. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Congratulations. Next on our agenda is public comment. If there's anyone who wishes to comment on any items that are not on today's agenda, please approach the podium one at a time. Please state your name and address. You have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Mike Peterson, 218 Apollo Beach Boulevard, Apollo Beach, Florida. And I'm wondering if you share my concern when you hear some of our elected officials, particularly some of the Hillsborough County Commission, continue to rile people up with the phrase uncontrolled and unplanned growth. Now, you ought to be concerned about that because for 60 years, this body has supposedly been in charge of long-range planning and controlling growth the best you can. Now, I'm not naive. It's not all your fault. What we're really seeing is a large population, and it's tough to accommodate, and everyone's dealing with it, but that doesn't spin everybody up as much as uncontrolled, unplanned growth. Now, you don't feel the heat lately. Everyone in the development industry seems to be the devil on that one, but you need to worry about whether that's coming for you. When I was a younger pup, a little slimmer, I chaired what is now the Hillsborough County Land Use Appeals Board. And we had to work under what was called the Horizon 2000 Comprehensive Plan. And like clockwork, every 5 years, we would see a comprehensive plan update, and it had to meet certain standards, and everyone kind of knew what was going on. But since those requirements have left the state law, tell me when we're going to finally see the big comprehensive plan update. We've heard it's coming, it's on the horizon, and what happens is we keep putting off a comprehensive plan update because special projects keep getting picked. We're doing this, and once we do that, it'll help us with the update. And these special projects are coming from desires of certain elected officials who want to nibble at their personal parts of the plan and aren't as worried about the big picture. So I want you to consider whether this body is starting to become a bit more of a contract manager on special projects at the behest of elected officials instead of the leading group, leading long-range planning that is supposed to coordinate the efforts of the various municipalities so everyone knows what they're doing. So Hillsborough County can't say, you know, talking about adding population is difficult, well, let's just try to minimize it, or let's just say we're going to push a lot of infill to the city. And of course, the city says, now, wait a minute, we're getting some people mad here in South Tampa, and we're not sure we can take all the population. I'm not sure when everyone else is going to hear the plan. I believe Melissa and the group are working on these kinds of things, but I'm not sure the citizenry is getting it. and your customers, the elected officials, aren't helping you with some of those phrases. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay. We will move on to item number 4 on our agenda, the MPO CAC appointee, Rick Richmond. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Rick Richmond, your appointed Citizens Advisory Committee for the MPO. I have a slide presentation here somewhere. Sorry.
Item number 5.
Thank you. So here for the quarterly update, last time I was before you all was in May. And since then, there's been two pretty significant items. The TIP, which is a yearly occurrence from May to June. It's voted on by the MPO. And then second is the long-range transportation plan, which was before this group last month, I believe. So we heard the TIP program. We review that in May prior to the board's vote in June, which is a public hearing. And there were several recommendations by the CAC to the TIP to strike from the priority list. 2 of them, actually there were 4 in separate motions, but the first group were kind of TBX related, or TB Next, which were the improvements north of downtown from MLK to Bears. And then the other one was the downtown interchange improvements. And then, so the second motion, and which was supported, was removing Big Bend Extension down in South County. And then the other one was the Balm improvements on between Clement Pride and 301, where Triple T High School is going in, actually. So we recommended approval with those amendments, and it passed 11-1. The board has since had their TIP meeting, and the item coming out of that was they also agreed to remove Big Bend Extension. That's located in the area of Triple Creek, which is also approved development and under construction. So the next was the long-range transportation plan. This is updated every 5 years. This one is for 2045. We heard the draft document in October, and it went to a board vote in November. There were some additional motions to remove some items from the plan. That includes the corridor between the West Shore interchange and the downtown interchange, where some of the express lanes were to extend and let traffic feed off of the express lanes and into downtown or go north or east. And the second one was State Road 60, widening from Dover Road to State Road 39. So there were a couple other motions to remove some items, all which have failed, but we recommended approval with the amended removals 8-6. So then the board had their public hearing and adopted the long-range transportation plan, which also included removal of State Road 60 from the long-range transportation plan. And lastly, I also, the CAC member or appointee for T-BARDA for Hillsborough County MPO, and they have some ongoing efforts there. The Envision 2030, which is their long-range transportation, is under development. This is the first draft for this and is part of T-BARDA's charter. So they've just wrapped up the technical memo 3, which is in the draft form. And then lastly, they continue to work on their PD&E study for the BRT connecting Wesley Chapel and downtown St. Petersburg. So that's all for my update. If anyone has any questions or comments.
Any questions for Mr. Rickman? No questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate your service. Next up is the item number 5, City of Plant City fiscal year 20 through 24 capital improvement elements. Schedule projects update.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Diego Guerra, Planning Commission staff. This is the Planning Commission's annual review of Plant City's FY20 through FY24 capital improvement element schedule of projects update. This is a routine annual update that is required by Chapter 163. This is an action item, and a resolution is provided for your vote. Chapter 163 requires that the schedule of projects, which is a list of projects that address level of service, be updated on an annual basis and is adopted in the comprehensive plan. This update would replace the existing schedule of projects in the comprehensive plan with that schedule located in your packets. City staff identified projects from the capital improvement program that affected level of service, and it is these projects that make up the schedule of projects. The update is accomplished through ordinance, which is permitted by Chapter 163. Additionally, the plans of other agencies are adopted by reference in the schedule through existing policy in the capital improvements element. Of note, the school board will adopt its 5-year work program on November 19th. The schedule is made up of three main categories that include streets, which consist of sidewalk improvement, bridges and other pedestrian enhancements, utilities, maintenance, and operations, which include sewer and potable water, and finally, stormwater. The total 5-year funding for the schedule of projects is approximately $43.47 million. The Planning Commission also examined the schedule with respect to the goals, objectives, and policies of the comprehensive plan. A few of the policies are identified on the slide. However, a full list of policies are identified in your packet. The schedule is consistent with the Capital Improvements Policy 1.1.14 that states that top priority for funding for repairs or replacements of obsolete or worn-out facilities. All of the projects meet this description. The schedule is consistent with policies requiring coordination with the 10-year water supply work plan. Water lines and water storage tank replacement projects are also identified in the work program, as they are identified in the schedule as well. The schedule furthers the intent of the infrastructure sub-elements, which include language that states provide quality infrastructure service to residents and enhancing transportation options. Planning Commission staff recommends the proposed capital improvement element schedule of proposed FY20 through FY24 capital improvement element schedule of projects update be found consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the Plant City Comprehensive Plan. That concludes my presentation. I am available for questions.
Okay, any questions from commissioners? Oh,
Diego Guerra.
any questions from commissioners? No questions? Would someone like to make a motion? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm already jumping ahead. Any public comment? No public comment? Now, any questions from commissioners? Commissioner Dix has made a motion for approval.
Second.
Can you state the motion?
That the Plant City fiscal year 20 through fiscal year 24 CIE schedule is consistent with the adopted Imagine 2040 of the Plant City Comprehensive.
Motion by Commissioner Dix, a second by Commissioner Dowdy. Any questions before we vote? All in favor of the motion as stated, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to item number 6, the City of Temple Terrace fiscal year 20 through 24 capital improvement section, CIE or CIS schedule of projects update.
Again, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Diego Guerra, Planning Commission staff. This item is the Planning Commission's review of City of Temple Terrace's FY20 through FY24 capital improvement section schedule of projects. This is a routine update that is required by Chapter 163 of Florida statutes. This is an action item, and a resolution is provided for your vote. Some of the slides are going to be similar from the previous presentation. This review was conducted in accordance with Chapter 163 that requires the schedule of projects be updated on an annual basis. The update would replace the existing schedule with the schedule in your packets. The update is accomplished by ordinance, which is permitted by Chapter 163. Additionally, the plans of other agencies are adopted by reference into the schedule through existing policies in the capital improvement section. Of note, the school board will adopt its 5-year work program on November 19, 2019. Temple Terrace City staff and Planning Commission staff worked on identifying projects in the CIP that affected the adopted level of service. City staff identified whether projects eliminated a deficiency, maintained level of service, or were planned for future growth. City staff also requested that a list of 10-year transportation projects be incorporated as part of the schedule. For those portions that were city projects within the first 5 years and specifically affected the level of service, those were included in the report analysis. Depicted on the slide is a summary of schedule of projects. There are 6 main program areas which identified and consist of a total of 87 projects. The total FY20 through FY24 funding is approximately $25.8 million. In terms of level of service priorities, the majority of the project funding, approximately 71% of the funding, are for repair renovation to maintain level of service. The remainder of the funding is intended for future growth or to eliminate deficiencies. Planning Commission staff examined the schedule with respect to the goals, objectives, and policies of Temple Terrace Comprehensive Plan. A few of those policies are depicted on the slide. However, a full list of the policies can be found in your packets. First, the schedule is consistent with the direction for level of service priorities, which states that they should first repair and replace of facilities, second, eliminate deficiencies, and third, plan for future growth. Secondly, the schedule is consistent with the funding criteria identified in the comprehensive plan, both in terms of revenue fund and timing. Additionally, the schedule of projects furthers several infrastructure sub-elements, including providing quality infrastructure services to residents and enhancing transportation options. Planning Commission staff recommends the proposed schedule of projects update be found consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the Imagine 2040 Temple Terrace Comprehensive Plan. This concludes my presentation. Myself and city staff are available for questions.
Okay, thank you. Any public comment on this item? Okay, no public comment. Any questions from commissioners? No questions? Would someone like to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Green.
Thank you. Move for finding of consistency for the City of Temple Terrace's fiscal year 2024 capital improvement section, capital improvement schedule, of projects be found consistent with the Imagine 2040 Temple Terrace Comprehensive Plan.
Okay. Got a motion by Commissioner Green, second by Commissioner Dowdy. Any questions before we vote or comments? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. We're moving on to item number 7, which is the consistency finding Hillsborough River State Park Unit Management Plan.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Diego Guerra, Planning Commission staff. This is an update to the Hillsborough River State Park Unit Management Plan, which is intended to replace the 2004 Unit Management Plan. I will provide a brief background, and a representative from the Department of Environmental Protection will provide a further detail following my presentation. Florida Department of Environmental Protection submitted the management plan to the Planning Commission with a request for consistency determination with the unincorporated Hillsborough County Comprehensive Plan per Chapter 97-351. A brief background and history of the park. It was acquired in 1935 and consists of a little over 3,300 acres. It's one of the original New Deal era parks in Florida. It provides a diversity of recreational opportunities from kayaking, mountain biking, camping, and provides picnic areas. The park also protects 47 designated animals and plant species. The park is located north central Hillsborough County, just south of the Pasco line along US 301 and just northeast of Temple Terrace. Management goals within the plan include protect water quality and quantity, restore natural communities, protect imperiled species, remove exotic species, and improve public facilities. Consistency considerations between management plan and the unincorporated Hillsborough County Comprehensive Plan include conserve and improve natural areas, water quality and quantity, public access, and public facilities. These items are congruent with both the management plan and the comprehensive plan. With those considerations, Planning Commission staff recommends that you find the Hillsborough River State Park Unit Management Plan consistent with the Hillsborough County for unincorporated Hillsborough County. At this time, Mr. Joel Alburn from the Department of Environmental Protection will provide further detail and information regarding the unit management plan.
Can you hear us, Joel?
Yes, sorry. Good afternoon. This is Joel Albritton with the Office of Park Planning. I just wanted to thank you all for reviewing this management plan for Hillsborough River State Park at today's meeting. If you could go to the next slide for me. Hillsborough River State Park, as Diego said, is located in Hillsborough County between Temple Terrace and Zephyr Hills. And the park was acquired in 1935 as one of Florida's 9 New Deal era parks that was shaped by the Civilian Conservation Corps. The park currently contains just over 3,319 acres, and it was acquired to provide outstanding resource-based recreational opportunities while also facilitating conservation efforts along the Hillsborough River. An additionally unique feature about the park is the park contains Class 2 rapids inside of the Hillsborough River. Next slide, please. Within its boundaries, the park protects and interprets 19 natural communities and altered land cover types. Some of these include 200 acres of mesic hammock, 321 acres of mesic flatwoods, 74 acres of blackwater stream, and 468 acres of hydric hammock. Next slide, please. The various natural communities at the park, they protect and provide habitat for 46 imperiled plant and animal species. This is 18 plants and 28 animals. And on the screen, the top left corner is the gopher frog. The top right is the swallowtail kite. Bottom left is the eared spleenworth, and the bottom right is the eastern indigo snake. Next slide. In addition, it has outstanding cultural resources, protects 7 archaeological sites and 19 historic structures, and the cultural resources represent time periods that include the Safety Harbor period, the Second Seminole War, the New Deal era, and the Civilian Conservation Corps. Next slide, please. So the park offers numerous recreational and interpretive opportunities to its visitors. These opportunities include hiking, biking, paddling, various picnicking opportunities, and opportunities to view wildlife and interpret the history of the property. Last fiscal year, in 2017-18, the park welcomed 206,836 visitors, and this created a $17.9 million direct economic impact to the local economy. And this economic impact is the equivalent of adding about 251 jobs. So next slide, please. In terms of resource management, since the previous plan was approved in 2004, all of the burn zones in the park have been burned on a 2 to 4 year rotation. The park has acquired some better equipment for treating exotics, and most of the depression marshes at the park have been restored to their natural habitat. Additional objectives for this plan include having 536 acres of the park maintained in the optimum fire return interval within 10 years, conducting habitat natural community restoration activities on 702 acres of natural communities, monitoring and documenting 4 of those imperiled plant and animal species, annually treating 430 acres of exotics, and then assessing, evaluating, and compiling some reliable documentation for all of the cultural resources at the park, as well as bringing 3 of those into good condition. Next slide, please. Excuse me. In terms of the land use improvements proposed in this management plan, they include updating and upgrading the restrooms, restoring a CCC pavilion, and adding an accessible floating dock to the picnic area, as well as repairing or renovating the stationary bridge, adding interpretation and erosion control on the Seminole Trail, renovating campsites, replacing 2 bathhouses, and then paving the access and loop roads in the campgrounds, as well as stabilizing the shoreline and repairing a seawall at the Cedar Landing, exploring the feasibility of installing some solar panels in an old spray field as well as on the shop roof, and then adding a restroom, interpretive kiosk, and restoring model dairy property at the old Fort King Trailhead. The last 3 on here are moving a Civilian Conservation Corps cabin to a parking lot to use it as an interpretive opportunity to the visitors, as well as adding a Clivis restroom, a pole barn, and a safer crossing for US 301 to get across the road to the Fort Foster property. Next slide, please. So this concludes the management plan proposal for Hillsborough River State Park. I thank you for the opportunity to present, and I'm able to take any questions or comments.
Okay, thank you. Any public comment on this item? No public comment. Any questions from commissioners? Commissioner Dowdy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not necessarily related to the plan, but I would like to say that this Hillsborough River State Park is one of my favorite parks in Florida. I do a lot of camping, and Hillsborough is on my list for every year, at least once, if not twice, that I go to. It's a fantastic park, and we are fortunate to have it in our community. And you brought up a couple of items, Joel, in the plan: the replacement of the stationary bridge and the seawall in the camping area. And I would just like to encourage you to get those done as soon as possible, because you're going to lose a lot of the area in your campground if you don't get that seawall done. It's been eroding for a little while now, and the stationary bridge also tends to put a little bit of a damper in some of the day hiking access. So it's not really a question, it's more of a comment and a suggestion to hurry every chance you get. So.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir, for the comments.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
I'm curious,
Commissioner Cardenas?
is there anything that's not in here that is needed that you're just kind of maybe projecting for the future, but not exactly on this go around?
Can you state that again?
No.
Oh,
He said no.
Everything that we are projecting should be on this presentation and in the management plan proposal.
okay. Any other questions or comments? Thank you.
Well, we got to make
Thank you so much.
Yep.
We have
And,
to-
yeah. Any, I haven't done public comment yet. Okay, yeah. Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Commissioner Dowdy?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that the commission finds the Hillsborough River State Park Unit Management Plan consistent with the future of Hillsborough Comprehensive Plan for unincorporated Hillsborough County.
Got a motion by Commissioner Dowdy. Do we have a second? Second. Second by Commissioner Bernstein. Any discussion before we vote? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is item number 8. Consistency finding for Hillsborough County Land Development Code Amendment 19-1053, microbreweries, micro wineries. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Unica Mills, Planning Commission staff. I'm here to introduce to you Mr. Israel Monsanto from Development Services staff, who will review with you Land Development Code Amendment 19-1053 regarding microbreweries. This is an action item for your vote today, and with no further ado, Mr. Israel Monsanto.
Good afternoon, Israel Monsanto, Development Services. Commissioners, this item was a workshop in the previous meeting last month. We had some comments. This amendment was updated. As you are aware, we added the micro wineries definition and standards to the text amendment. The next scheduled public hearing will be in front of the Board of County Commissioners. That will be on December 19th, 2019 at 6 p.m. The first public hearing on this item was a workshop last month, and we received favorable comments from the public on this text amendment. Compared to the previous presentation during your workshop, this is mostly remained the same. We added the micro winery to the standards and definitions. This amendment will incorporate, again, standards for both to allow retail sale or wholesale distribution of beer in commercial zoning districts. It will dictate a maximum barrels of beer and a maximum gallons of wine. In the commercial neighborhood zoning districts, the distribution, wholesale distribution will not be permitted as it's a requirement in our code today. There are reports of monthly production of beer and wine, which are publicly accessible through the Department of Business and Professional Regulation website. Therefore, county staff will have the ability to access these reports to verify data for compliance. The proposed amendment will also include standards and restrictions for the outdoor storage of materials, which is not permitted in the commercial neighborhood and commercial general zoning districts. And the section, part 12 of the Land Development Code is also being updated to include the definition of microbrewery and micro wineries to be clarified for this item. And with that, I am available if you have any questions. This is the end of my presentation.
Okay, thank you. Any public comment on this item? No public comment. Any questions from commissioners? Okay. No questions. Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll move.
Commissioner Bernstein?
Yeah, the motion would be to, for a resolution finding that the plan as proposed related to brew pubs and microbreweries and micro wineries consistent with the future Hillsborough comprehensive plan, and that we approve it on that basis.
Okay, Commissioner Bernstein's made the motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Kress. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Next up is item number 9. It's the status update for the Ybor City Vision 2020 plan.
Good afternoon, Jay Collins. From a short conversation that we just had about microbrewing, let's go to Ybor City, which is Tampa's home to the oldest microbrewery that we have. Several months ago, the city of Tampa came to the Planning Commission and asked for the question of, can you help us actually update that CRA plan, community redevelopment area for Ybor City? The city of Tampa, along with Planning Commission staff, had a request for proposals to do just that. And Mr. Neil Strelo from VHB was actually awarded that contract. And Neil is here today to basically give you a synopsis of our 10-month journey. So with that, Neil, while I attempt to bring up a PowerPoint, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Jay. Good afternoon, Commission members. I'm Neil Strelo, a senior planner with VHB. Our offices are right across the street at 501 East Kennedy, Suite 1010. So it was a quick walk over. Thank you. Our presentation today is providing a few high-level takeaways, and the agenda item is for your information and discussion purposes. Thank you so much. So as Jay said, we were fortunate to be selected with a quality team by the city and the Planning Commission early part of 19, got started in February. Our team includes Landwise advisors who produced a retail market assessment for the project, and open workshop for architecture. And Fadi Garcia is our teammate here with me today. We really appreciate their input on the urban form and design elements within the district. Multiple planning assessments were completed as part of this project report, and I think a link to that final document was provided to you. So if you have some time, it's a good document, and we had a lot of input into it. We can all recognize that Ybor City is a historic Tampa neighborhood, that the community is connected to downtown and its surrounding neighborhoods, and that change is occurring. Important commercial corridors along the entire length of 7th Avenue and the recently redeveloped 21st and 22nd Streets are premium retail locations for the district, along with these transitioning areas where existing development is occurring toward the south along Adamo Drive and is anticipated in the future. We know that this is going to continue to evolve. We know that it's going to continue to change. And we see adaptive reuse occurring of historic structures, new infill residential development, and some substantial investments in hotel and restaurants that are coming, will be coming to opening pretty soon. The graph on the left is the 2045 projections of what change is anticipated. And you'll see both in dwelling units and household population and in employment, all are going to increase by 2045. And in our conversations with the major property owners within the district, they think that's going to occur quicker than the 2045 period. So as part of that, we included extensive engagement and delivery. We spoke regularly and routinely with the YCDC Board of Directors and all of their standing subcommittees, along with the homeowners associations and business and property owners. We completed a community workshop along with these presentations and updates to City CRA and Planning Commission. Our engagement also included a dedicated website that contained more than 250 online survey responses, and our community workshop, which was well attended, and we processed more than 100 people that night in that community workshop. Some of the key takeaways, the retail market assessment, looking at first floor retail on 7th and 8th, the primary locations. Two high takeaways out of this: there is a vacancy of 14% along those corridors, and that's a little bit high in terms of a robust retail location. Aiming at 10% vacancy as a norm for well-traveled retail locations. The other item in this is that office uses are representing 20% of this space. And the preference would be to see those uses occur on a second floor and reinforce the retail use on the primary floor, but it's certainly better than a vacancy number. Landwise also looked at what the projected demands are for retail in the district and looking at what is currently planned to come into delivery. And what you see on the right-hand side is that there's an unmet need of more than 70,000 square feet of retail use currently in the district. And that is based upon existing population and employment projections, not on the projections. These will grow with the anticipated 2045 projections for increased population and employment in the district. A few of the planning assessments included a review of land use and zoning, looking for those opportunity areas where redevelopment is occurring, And part of these discussions focused on the consistency between zoning, land use, and the urban design guides of the Barrio Latino District. There are nuances between the delivery between those, and the general community felt that there was should be a better alignment of those. So part of our review was looking at those height characteristics across the district. I apologize, this is very small, but 45 feet and 60 feet really are the limits of zoning up to the perimeter of the Adamo Drive corridor where higher intensity use is envisioned. Part of our discussion was also about the need to recognize the differences between contributing and non-contributing parcels within this district. The community supports the historic district, certainly doesn't want to jeopardize its designation, but there is a feeling that redevelopment of parcels that do not have contributing structures, historic structures on them, should be dealt with differently in the urban design guide, in the urban design guidelines. And the city is updating those currently. Open workshop for architecture, and Fadi's team created some 3D representations of what that redevelopment could look like in adjacency to historic properties. They looked at both existing condition on a prototypical block up to 2, 3, and 4, 5-story redevelopment. And what you'll see is that there are advantages certainly for the accommodation of parking on property and for increased yields, obviously, within the district. Both of items are representative of street context, using building setback and step back in order to meet consistency with historic structures that may be in adjacency to these developments. The project team also completed a series of infrastructure planning assessments, and I mentioned briefly parking availability continues to be a focus within the district, and certainly the central core doesn't have a parking requirement as part of their historic designation. But the existing parking inventory, those highlighted here, are the public spaces within the district, the garages and surface lots. More than 60% of the total public space inventory already has a restricted use on it. Somebody has a permit for either daytime or nighttime or 24-hour use on those spaces. And we envision that this is going to continue to increase in rate of use with the office and residential uses that are planned to come into the 7th Avenue corridor. There is a continued desire from the community for additional parking on the east end of the district where the surface parking lots are at currently. There was a discussion about reuse of those lots, protecting the number of parking spaces that were within them, but looking at public-private partnerships to try and activate those lots with vertical development along with providing public spaces. In the near term, these are the private spaces that vendor provided, private owner provided in the district, certainly needed for the commercial uses along 7th. Private lots provide a substantial amount of the inventory, but there is a continued desire for safe and lighted routes, and that employee pricing, different strategies be looked at in order to provide solutions for those employees who routinely work varied hours in the district. Walkability is seen as a major contributor to the district's success, and the community desired better linkages to downtown, its surrounding neighborhoods. This map represents both the existing sidewalks and the missing sidewalks within the district. We looked at ADA accessibility ramps, and along with bike and ped, sidewalk improvements, and all looking at how they can interconnect to the Leroy Solomon Greenway and the planned Nucio Green Spine. Longer trips, e-scooter, micro-mobility, any way to extend those trips was seen as a benefit to the district. And certainly the historic context and the Brick Street network needs to be recognized and protected during the future development of infrastructure. One of the planning assessments that we looked at was really this discussion about community health and how these types of infrastructure improvements can add and lend to community health. We know that walkable community projects increase physical activity and improve the job and housing access, but it also contributes to the economic development of districts and certainly be part of the conversation moving forward in support of infrastructure improvements. The strategic action plan is section 5 of the report, and it really contains a bringing forward of the vision document from 2005, along with the update of 2010, and then adding new strategies that are included within the 2020, both under plan and policy and infrastructure-based strategies. So these last slides really were a compendium of the 2020 plans coming forward, the new strategies. And if you have a moment, please take a look at them in the final report. These will be the items that staff will be bringing forward in terms of CRA plans, their budgeted plans on a yearly basis, and it'll add to the flavor and the viability of the district. With that, I'd like to say thank you for selecting us, and it was a great process, good colleagues on staff, and if you have any questions, I'd be glad to take them.
Okay. Let me ask if there's any public comment on this item. Anyone from the public like to speak on this item? Okay, no public comment. Any questions from commissioners? Commissioner Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Neil. And thanks for making this presentation. I have a couple of questions about the vision itself for Ybor City. In terms of redevelopment, I think some of the diagrams that you showed that Fadi and his team worked on really looked at infill opportunities, and I'm curious what types of density, maximum density, is actually allowed on some of those parcels?
Well, the highest district is the UMU 60 within the district itself. You can see there's a range, but that gray area is really the historic context in the middle along 7th. I don't think that these attainable density is limited by the 45 and 60 feet height, and then those parking requirements, and then part of our other studies were the effect of new floodplain mapping may have on portions of the district. There's things that chip into that.
Okay. Yes, that was the reason why I was asking the question, because I wasn't sure if you could even attain those certain densities with those height restrictions in place.
And I think that is the biggest question, and certainly the context and what we saw as a differentiator between contributing and non-contributing parcels. And then also, if you see Adamo runs across the south of that image, there's a large area of property that is not within the CRA or the historic district. And so having an appropriate transition in that location, that probably there will be more additional density in that location, but that's based on plan and policy guidance.
That's going to be real key, that transition, because you can see things come right up to that line and stop. And on the other side, what's being considered or what's been talked about over the years is something much, much more dense.
Yes, and and the historic pattern of EBOR, it's a grid and alley network, and part of the guidance in the vision plan is to protect that grid. So there's some challenges of developing high intensity uses, even outside of the district, without creating super blocks and accommodating parking somehow, unless there's some way to offset that through a policy, public policy of minimizing the parking.
Now you mentioned parking, and you still have a lot of surface parking lots in Ybor City.
Yeah.
Does the vision look at, let's say, out in the future or at some point in the future where the property values for those surface lots hits that threshold where it's just not worth, I mean, the property's not worth parking cars on all day?
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, did that factor into any of your decisions?
We left the parking strategies discussion open, recognizing that there were going to need to be numerous and probably phased evolution of those strategies. You're right in terms of there are major property owners who control most of those properties, and having parking adjacent to the commercial district, that entertainment and restaurant district, is an easy relationship, symbiotic relationship. Someday in the future, it's going to mean more to have residential and other mixed-use building in that proximity, and it's probably a point in time.
Which means also there's probably going to be increased pressure on the city to.
Right. Unless we build enough a variety of housing where people can live and work in the district, or maneuver by transit through the downtown to their job and their housing. Right.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We're going to move on to item number 10, the Ruskin Community Character Profile presentation.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Jay Collins, Planning Commission staff. Next up for you is some similarity to what we just saw with Neil with Ybor, in that we're going to talk about some data and some analysis, but we're not going to have the strategic action portion of it. So what we're going to talk about here is much more of basically a temperature check, something that's factual in nature, but without the recommendations at the end. Okay. So this is the Ruskin Community Economic Profile, and a little bit of background first for it. So the community of Ruskin has a community plan. That community plan was adopted in 2005. South County, Ruskin, a lot of change has occurred in these areas since 2005. The citizens, the employees, the residents, business owners are interested in where they have been since 2005 and where they are going now. And so they basically asked their elected officials down on the second floor of the Board of County Commissioners for a little help with that. They wanted to have that conversation with somebody to say, well, let's do a temperature check. Let's see where we are right now as a community, and let's pull some numbers together and have that conversation. Then the Board of County Commissioners, along with Development Services as well as Economic Development, and ourselves, the Planning Commission, went forward in again, an RFP process to look for a consultant to go ahead and work through this. And I'm going to give that presentation today for that consultant strategic planning group. Okay. So basically, the purpose of this is to analyze market and economic development trends affecting development and redevelopment demand through 2023. That's the important part about this, about why it is that we end up bringing consultants in for this. We do not have the expertise in-house to do that type of analysis, that retail gap analysis, office analysis, industrial analysis that you're asking for in that type of a conversation. It also includes some sub-areas in this, and I brought those here just to mention them. We're not going to talk about them in the future of this presentation. This is a 100-page document. There is a lot of data involved in this, but we're going to break some of it down for you. So what are some of these elements? There's a lot of it in this community profile that are the types of things that we do have in-house with the Planning Commission, namely some of the demographics, land use and building activities, whether those are permits, plan amendments and such, mobility options that are available to the community. Then we get into that economic development aspect that we talked about earlier. Infrastructure, we do have a mention of all of the capital improvement projects that are within this community plan for the next couple of years. Environmental, there is a tremendous amount of environmental overlay that occurs in this area. Whether there is the 100-year floodplain, the coastal high hazard area, wildlife habitat, all of which has a significant impact on the development potential within the community. And then finally, some social issues, whether it is English level proficiency, whether it are folks that are at the poverty level, or race and ethnicity issues that we may be able to encounter within the community. So all of these are different aspects that we put into the profile to build, again, something that is factual in nature. So here is just a little overview of the Ruskin community. This is just a map. That solid blue line that you see there, that is the urban service boundary. It's interesting. Again, this is a community that is bifurcated by that. So there is a very real distinction in this community of what is suburban and what is rural. Basically, it's going right along I-75 there. So once you go south of this, once you go south in this area, you've gone out and you've gone into basically an agricultural area. So what was one of the first things that was done in this, once we got some data, is a SWOT analysis. And that's basically strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I want to put this at the beginning of this conversation we're going to have, because I want you to be able to look at this laundry list, this grocery list, if you will, and go, as we continue through and show you some of this data. You'll notice that some of the strengths that they talk about are their location in their transportation getting up onto I-75. But then you'll also notice that that is seen possibly as a weakness in that they are removed from some of the urban centers, and they also have some issues with their own transportation and infrastructure that they have. Planning is another one here. They see planning as both a strength and a weakness, and hopefully we're capitalizing on both of those right now, elevating those strengths and reducing that weakness by having these conversations with the community. So let's dive into it a little bit. Basically, when you look at it, a lot of this is similar to what you would see elsewhere in the county. One thing that was very interesting to me is you'll see in the middle there, the owner-occupied and renter-occupied. There is a lot of home ownership that is in Ruskin. That is evident of a community that has seen explosive growth in the recent times. What you basically have there is a lot of new subdivisions that have come online, and you've got a lot of people that have moved into that community. So you have some growing pains that are there. And you also have some pains that come out through the conversations that are had of basically what our community was like and what our community is becoming with this influx of people. So here again, you have some further breakdown of where we've been. In the Census 2000, you can see just over 17,000. Now we're at 26,000, projected to go to 30,000. And again, that is the development of primarily raw land and some redevelopment within the urban service boundary. This is Ruskin. This is an unincorporated area of Hillsborough County. We're not talking about growth that you may see in Plant City through annexation or in Temple Terrace. This is all just growth of having new development occur along the Ruskin corridor, so along 41 and along I-75. A little bit about some of the housing trends. Again, you can see here that the explosion of single-family homes that you had, just under 2,000 in the year 2000, now having seen more than a doubling of that, with just a very slight increase, although proportionate to the amount of housing that is there, of multifamily. So is there the room for the growth of multifamily housing? Maybe, maybe not, because that's an issue of land use when you start to have that conversation. And you'll see in a little while, the primary residential land uses that you do have in here are residential 4s, residential 9s, and residential 12s. Speak of the devil, there it is. We did also look at the build-out here. And build-outs are always interesting because we do these in plan amendments, and the numbers sometimes are startling. As you can see here, over 140,000 people. Well, that is a true build-out, but that is a build-out with raw land, in which case I'm not having any conversations about some of the environmental concerns. I'm not having conversations about the truth in zoning that is there, and I'm not taking into account basically the people. Because the people down there obviously would have an issue possibly if you try to put 140,000 people, I should say 110,000 additional people in a community that is today 30,000 people. You can also see just to the south there of I-75, where you go into the rural areas, a lot of agricultural land that is there, a lot of residential 1 that is there. So these are some of those environmental this is unemployment in communities of concern. Unemployment is to my left. Ruskin's unemployment is pretty small compared to some of the other areas of the community that we have here. One thing I found that was interesting, I was looking at it and I was going, well, what is happening just to the west of I-75 there? Why do we have such a high unemployment? It's the kind of unemployment we all hope for one day. That is Sun City Center, and those are retirees. So that's the kind of unemployment that we all aspire to one day. Communities of concern, Ruskin is identified as a community of concern here in Hillsborough County, meaning it has 2 or more boxes checked, those boxes being a community that has English limited proficiency, so you can think of ESOL, English speaker of another language. It can be race and ethnicity, a high proportion, and that's a proportionate based off of what the county's average is. You can look at a higher percentage of households in poverty, a higher percentage of single mother households, that type of issues that you may have in the community. So this was I was getting at earlier about the natural hazards that you may have in this area. So there on my left, that is basically your 100-year floodplain, and you can see there, and then you can see to my right, basically the coastal high hazard area. Get a little mental image of that, and then go back to where you had the future land uses. You can see those are the future land uses that have some of the densities and intensities. That is the older established area of Ruskin. That might be the area that you say that you'd like to see some redevelopment occur. Those are also areas that are in the floodplain, and those are also the areas that we have that are within the coastal high hazard area. So again, while we provide this factual data, that factual data then needs to be basically have these conversations to truth that data one step further. Getting into finally, basically part of the reason why it is that we went out and actually got a consultant for this is some of the retail gap analysis. So when we talk about that, there's how much money is within a community based off of a household and how much they can spend. That's the basic idea of it. And here for Ruskin, there's about $250 million worth of expenditure. Now that retail trade, and we'll go into a little bit more in the food and drink, it may be going to a movie, it may be gasoline sales, it's buying groceries, and that sort of thing. And there is definitely a conversation that you can have about the what if. What about Amazon, which there's actually a huge distribution center there in Ruskin. There's a lot of what ifs, and I'm sure that the methods that they use for gap analysis are changing rapidly. And I would suspect that we'll see some more conversations occur in this discipline in the coming years. So what is the supply that occurs there? The supply is that brick and mortar shop that you actually have on the ground. So there is just under $120 million worth there. So that's the gap then that you see of $130 million. That's $130 million that the people of Ruskin go outside of their border, if you will, to purchase goods and services. So, and that's a conversation that we have with the folks in Ruskin. Folks in Ruskin go up to Apollo Beach, maybe they go to Sun City. Same thing that you have with the folks in Waimama. The folks in Waimama go over to Sun City. Same thing you have with the folks in Gibsonton or Riverview about possibly going up into Brandon. So it's not a unique phenomenon that's here in Ruskin. It occurs everywhere within the county as people move out and they move back in. So could you capture $120 million worth of retail within the Ruskin community? No, because that leakage factor is then going to affect what happens outside of it. But does that $120 million mean that you could actually see an increase in certain types of retail trade and food and drink establishments in Ruskin? Yes, by all means. So this breaks that down just a little bit more by numbers. Some of you love numbers. Others like bar graphs. So there's a bar graph coming up. So if you're looking at this and you're like, oh, my Lord, that's a lot of numbers, we'll get to the bar graph in a minute. But this just basically shows you, again, some of the specific numbers involved in it and then what the gap is within it. And as you can see, the only one that they are actually over, there's a surplus in it, meaning that folks from outside their community would come in, is actually in that food and beverage store. So food and beverage, maybe convenience goods and that sort of thing. So here's that bar graph showing you much in that same respect that we just had. Again, showing you just one where there is a surplus and the rest of them where there is actually a need to fill within that community. So a little bit about the employment profile. Jobs to housing ratio is something that it's good right now. We want to know a lot about jobs to housing ratio. We want to know what is the proper ratio that we're looking for within the community. And then we want to start asking questions about where are people moving in your community outside, and then where are people from outside your community coming in. So what are we looking here? These are the jobs on the left, and you'll see something, and I scratched my head too. I was like, agriculture, forestry, fishing, and mining. Look at that, 40%. That is because of the raw land that occurs there. There is a tremendous amount of agricultural land that is in Ruskin, so there is a multiplier effect that you will get out of that. Because again, we don't actually look at the specificity of going out and doing a windshield survey of what's occurring in Ruskin. Instead, this is looking at your DOR codes off of businesses. It's looking at the square footage. There's a lot of different things that go into make that pie, make that cake, if you will. But obviously, Ruskin is a very important agricultural center for the county with the tomato production as well as other crops that you have. What we have on the right there is basically showing you where are people coming from to go in to Ruskin to work. And this is interesting, and we'll get a little bit more to it. You can see that obviously there are some people that live and work in Ruskin, but it's very interesting to see how distributed and blown out that is, that you can see people up in Apollo Beach, up in Gibsonton, Riverview, Brandon, as well as in the city of Tampa, or folks that are coming from Pinellas all the way into the community. So again, that issue of people moving through our region to work. And this, again, is evident in all areas of Hillsborough County. I'm sure you are all aware that the city of Tampa's daytime population swells with the number of people that come into the city to work. So a little bit about that employment connectivity that we mentioned here. You can see that growth of where people are moving to actually take a job. They're moving to the north and they're moving to the northeast. So that means the primary movement of people are going up I-75 corridor, possibly out to Brandon, possibly further afield. There's not a lot of movement of the people moving south into areas of Manatee County or further. And you can see on this that over 7,000 people are leaving that community every day to go find work elsewhere. So remember what I talked about earlier with that retail gap? That is part of that jobs housing balance that we're looking at, is to say, I've got 7,000 people that go elsewhere. I've got a retail gap of almost $120 million. There's got to be something on the employment side and something on making sure that I can keep some of those people in this community. One of the things we hear all the time from people in the South County is basically an exhaustion. I drove 45 minutes to an hour each day, each way, to get to a job in West Shore. You hear that from a lot of people down there. They love their community, but they want to see some employment closer to them that'll support the lifestyle that they've chosen to have down there. And with that, the last thing we have is always a what now. Again, this was something that was factual with a little bit of analysis. We have had a conversation with Ruskin. We did actually go out there on October the 22nd and present this to a very packed house. Commissioner Merman was in attendance of that. We're still distributing this profile to a variety of different business groups and community groups. And also, what has spurred out of this, there are similar projects that are now being undertaken for the communities of Waimama and Gibsonton. I thank you for your time, and this concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you. Any public comment on this item? No public comment. Any questions from commissioners? Commissioner Cardenas?
On the, in reference to the retail gap, is there, you mentioned that you were having conversations with residents about, you know, what can be done there. Has there been any conversations with any of the developers that are building the projects and, you know, kind of developing the communities?
Yeah, we have not actually had face-to-face conversations with them other than the anecdotal conversations that have occurred at that October 22nd meeting.
Okay. Any other
questions? We welcome the opportunity, I would say that.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to item number 11, which is an action item. Consideration of request for appeal of Executive Director's interpretation on the Waimama Village Residential 2 requirements.
That's an interesting map. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Tracy Robin with Straley Robin Veriker. We serve as your general counsel, as you know. This agenda item this afternoon before you is to consider a request for appeal of the Executive Director's interpretation on the Waimama Village Res 2 requirements. You've got an executive summary before you. Attached to that executive summary, there's 3 letters. These dates are kind of important, so I want to go ahead and attract your attention to a couple of them up front. We received the first letter from Mr. Kramer, which is actually the letter requesting an interpretation on August the 29th. And the last letter that was received was also from Mr. Kramer, had to do with, on October the 15th, requesting the actual appeal. Now, I understand from Ms. Zornita that there are some other correspondence that's been received by email, by letters, which are before you at your seat. I know there's also a letter from the county attorney's office which supports the recommendation that I'm about to make. Now, a couple of the letters that are attached to the executive summary discuss the merits of the director's interpretation in some significant detail. And I want to point out to the board that we're not here this afternoon to consider the appeal itself or to have a discussion on the merits of that appeal. We're here to determine or for the board to decide whether or not to hear the appeal at all, and if so, to then set a date for that appeal. If the appeal hearing is set, it'll be set at a date and time in the future with due notice to the public and all interested parties. The recommendation that I have for you this afternoon, frankly, is made purely on a procedural, legal ground, as opposed to the questions that have been raised about the actual interpretation. And to that extent, it's very important that we preserve the record for any appeal that might be heard. It's important that we not taint that record by having that discussion this afternoon. We want to have the integrity of that hearing protected so that you would be sitting as a neutral third-party arbiter in making any decisions in that capacity. And I might add, for that reason, I will purposefully avoid any comments or opinions about the interpretation and ask you to do the same this afternoon during any discussion that we have. Now, the county's comprehensive plan has a procedure for interpretations. It's a little bit different from the 3 cities and incorporates an extra element. I think you all are familiar with the fact that the cities typically, you have a plan interpretation request that's made to the executive director. The county's plan contemplates that we would go through a similar process. There be a written request to the executive director for a specific interpretation of a particular policy or provision, and that the executive director would then issue a written interpretation. The county's plan then goes further to provide that if you're the requesting party and you're dissatisfied with the executive director's interpretation, that within 20 days after the interpretation's been rendered, you can make application to the Planning Commission to hear an appeal. And that's the genesis of the request that's before you in terms of where it's embodied in, this provision is embodied in the plan. And I passed out to you, I had a couple of questions regarding the plan provisions. I passed out to you earlier, also at your seat, a 2-page copy of the particular interpretation provisions that are contained in the plan. The task of the Planning Commission then at any hearing of this sort would be to decide to uphold or to not uphold the executive director's decision. Now, that doesn't mean that that's the final decision on the matter. You know, the Planning Commission has advisory powers. It's the Board of County Commissioners who is the final arbiter or interpreter of the county's plan. So the recommendation would go forward to the County Commission, and the County Commission has the final say-so. Now, with that background in mind, there's some important facts that have occurred that I need to outline for you so that you can understand how we got where we are and the genesis or the basis for my recommendation this afternoon. As outlined in the executive summary, on April the 9th, 2019, the Board of County Commissioners at one of their meetings, made a specific request of the Planning Commission to interpret the requirements, the employment and service requirements of the Wimauma Village Res 2 land use category, sometimes affectionately called the WVR2 category. The Board of County Commissioner made that request in connection with a zoning matter, which the subject matter of which is not relevant here this afternoon. But the interesting part about it is that when the interpretation request came in for Mr. Kramer at the end of August, it was for precisely the same interpretation. Now, to take you back to my story, the Board of County Commissioner makes this request of the Executive Director in April. The Executive Director works with staff and makes a determination which is published in a revised staff report that's published and delivered to the Zoning Hearing Master on June 11th. So the interpretation that's the subject of our request was actually made back on June 11th by your Executive Director. On August the 13th, that zoning actually goes back to the Board of County Commissioners, and they do what they do with it. It's unimportant to the procedure here this afternoon, except for this important fact. The Board of County Commissioners adopted a motion at that hearing, or after that hearing was concluded, on their own motion, on their own account. They approved the Executive Director's interpretation of this provision in the plan. And the motion, I thought you might want to hear how the motion read. It was made by Commissioner Overman. And she said, and I quote, "I move this board adopt the interpretation of the Planning Commission as it relates to the employment and service requirements contemplated in the Wimauma Village District 2 policies. within the future land use element in the Waimama Village Community Plan. So by taking this action, the board's made the final interpretation on the WVR2 category in terms of what they as the decision-making authority, how they're going to interpret the plan. And they resolved that issue at that time. Now, back to the petitioner's or applicant's request, 2 weeks after the Board of County Commissioners adopted the Planning Commission's interpretation, Mr. Kramer's first letter was received for an interpretation on this precise issue. Ms. Zornita sent a letter back on September the 26th advising that this interpretation had already been requested. It had been requested by the Board of County Commissioners, gave the dates, and then observed that the Board of County Commissioners had taken up the issue on its own and had made a decision that to approve the executive director's interpretation. We then get a follow-up letter on October the 15th, which is 20 days after the letter that Ms. Zornita sent, as if that was the time trigger for the 20 days for asking for an appeal. And he seeks the opportunity to be heard for his client before the Planning Commission and to appeal Ms. Zornita's interpretation. And quite simply, the applicant's request is untimely from a legal procedural perspective. Prior to requesting the interpretation or the appeal, the Board of County Commissioner had made the final interpretation. Any dispute or opportunity to appeal the Planning Commission's interpretation was subsumed or preempted by the Board of County Commissioners' action. And in any event, the action to request the appeal was not taken within 20 days from the time the interpretation was rendered. The letter I mentioned before to you earlier from the County Attorney's Office, you may want to take a look at that. The County Attorney's Office has reviewed this and concurred with that, with the recommendation that I'm about to make. So based upon the procedural defects and the Board of County Commissioners' action, it's my recommendation to the Planning Commission that the appeal is untimely and should be dismissed on the grounds that the appeal was preempted by the Board of County Commissioners' final interpretation resolving the requirements of the WVR2 land use category, and secondly, that it's not timely requested within the 20 days after the Executive Director's interpretation. And if the Board has any questions, I'll be glad to address them at this time.
Okay, thank you. I was going to ask if the requester would like to speak on this item.
There may be. I think you should, I think it would be appropriate to have them, provide them with that opportunity, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Yeah, would the requester like to speak on this item? Welcome. Please state your name and address.
Thank you. Jake Kramer with Stearns Weaver Miller, 401 East Jackson Street, representing the petitioner. Commissioners, I'll admit this is an unusual proceeding. I'm not sure if this commission has ever seen anything quite like this. I'd like to start today by reading you your mission statement. Planning Commission promotes, coordinates, collaborates with, and facilitates the involvement of all people in the long-range planning and vision for our community to improve economic development, quality of life, and provide value-added services. The only thing my client is asking for today is for you to provide us with a hearing so we can provide you the information that you need to make the interpretation that the county's comprehensive plan says that you should make. That's all we're asking for today. We're having a hearing before a hearing. Today's hearing does have some important implications, I think, for the future of this commission, and I'll explain those. First, and I'll honor your council's request and not get too deep into the details of the request, but I think you at least have to know what it's for. Why are we asking for this, and why does no one want you to hear this appeal? The essence of our appeal is that the plain language of the Waimama Village Plan and a comp plan category called WVR2 directs only the location, of development in and around Waimama, and it completely lacks any timing standard for how that development occurs. The text does not contain any such requirement for timing. That wasn't the intent. The legislative history doesn't suggest that's the case. The Planning Commission staff, however, in the context of a rezoning that we weren't involved in, recently determined that job opportunities must exist within Waimama before residential development can proceed. That's why we're here. That's why this is an issue. In past rezonings, the Planning Commission staff had interpreted the same comp plan policies differently. So we were concerned about the lack of consistency when we heard about it. We were also concerned because previously county staff, 2 county zoning hearing masters, multiple land use professionals, and the people who were involved in the drafting of WVR2 all agreed that the language on your screen directed only the location of growth and not its timing. Now, the county knows how to develop these timing triggers. In fact, at the same time WVR2 was adopted, the county adopted an explicit timing trigger in a category called RP2, a different category. So this was a big shock. We had no mechanism to challenge this interpretation. We had no mechanism to provide the Planning Commission with additional information that we recovered in our research. We had no mechanism to discuss this with the Board of County Commissioners because in the vote that your council mentioned, public hearing wasn't taken. It wasn't even an agenda item. So that's why we requested a formal decision from the executive director to try to get some consistency on this issue once and for all. We filed an interpretation, and then we filed an appeal within 20 days of receiving Ms. Sornina's letter. Now, I have great respect for Ms. Sornina. We just happen to have a difference of professional opinion on this issue. Before I explain the language in the comp plan, I'd like to give you a couple of important principles of law for how do we interpret comprehensive plans. And that goes back a little bit further even to how this commission is organized. The County Home Rule Charter gives you the responsibility for comprehensive planning and related activities as they're given to you by law. You probably know that Chapter 163 governs comprehensive plans in Florida. What you might not know is Chapter 163 was actually based in part on the governing statutes that created this commission in the first place. Chapter 163, governs local planning agencies. And basically it says that local planning agencies shall perform any functions that are given to you by the governing body, which would be Hillsborough County in this case. Further, state law requires all government entities to follow comprehensive plans once they're adopted. I think we all are familiar with that requirement. Case law says that comprehensive plans are land use constitutions. And your first task, anyone's first task when interpreting a comprehensive plan, is to inquire as to the plain meaning. And if the language is clear and unambiguous, then it's simple. We just follow the comprehensive plan language. Case law also says that Chapter 163 is framed as a rule or command that basically everyone must comply with comprehensive plans once they're adopted. Again, I think we all intuitively know this, but that's what the case law says. That case that I just quoted also goes even further. It says that local governments are not entitled to deference on its own interpretation of its own comprehensive plan. In fact, that case called Pinecrest Lakes versus Scheidel, in that case, a court held that disregarding the language of a comp plan is so serious that the court made a developer tear down a multifamily building that was already occupied because the local government hadn't complied with its comprehensive plan in approving the project. So this is the section of the Hillsborough County Comprehensive Plan that you're being asked to interpret or apply today. It gives two ways that interpretations can be made, and I don't think this was necessarily made clear earlier. The first type of interpretation is what you all are probably most familiar with, and this is when you have a specific development proposal. The staff of the Planning Commission may provide analyses which include broad interpretations of the overall intent of the plan. Note that there's no appeal provision provided for this type of interpretation. This makes sense. Your professional staff have to interpret the language of the comprehensive plan day in and day out to do their jobs. What's curious about the comprehensive plan in Hillsborough County is that it says in the event, there's a second interpretive mechanism. In the event a more specific interpretation of a particular policy or provision of the plan is necessary or requested, it can be submitted in writing to the executive director. This decision must be from an overall policy basis rather than directed toward a particular development proposal. If the applicant disagrees with the executive director, then she can appeal to this governing body. In that case, the appeal shall be decided by the Planning Commission based upon its findings of fact to achieve the purposes of the plan. Further, the appeal shall be heard at a regular meeting. The appellant shall be provided the opportunity to present his position. And in exercising this power, the Planning Commission shall act in a prudent manner that serves the purposes of this plan. To me, none of this is ambiguous. This is very straightforward. We have two types of interpretation. One is a specific interpretation related to specific development proposals, say related to a comp plan amendment or rezoning. Or two, the second is a broader policy-based interpretation. The second process can only be handled by the executive director directly, and then if the applicant disagrees, she can have this entire governing body make the final interpretation of the comprehensive plan. In the second scenario, the plain language of the comprehensive plan says that interpretive issues must be decided in a full hearing by this commission. Quite simply, the county commission many years ago had so much faith in this body that it gave it the authority to interpret its own plan. So today we're only dealing with the second kind of interpretation. We weren't involved in the case that Mr. Robin mentioned. We had no standing to comment on that interpretation. Neither did the Board of County Commissioners or this body take any public comment so that we could be a part of the process. Remember, going back to your vision statement in the beginning. Consequently, the only way that the comprehensive plan allows for that broader interpretation is by the mechanism we chose that's in the plan. We submitted a request. We received a letter that does mention that there were previous interpretations, again, that we weren't a part of, but it says, to confirm, this is my interpretation. It sounds awfully a lot like an interpretation to me that we then appealed within the 20 days allowed by the plan. So again, all we're asking for today is a full and fair hearing. We're asking you to give us a chance. I think there's some residents in the area that would also like the chance for a full and fair hearing to talk about the history of the Waimama Village Plan, the history of the WVR2 comprehensive plan category, and give you the input that you deserve and that the County Commission frankly gave you decades ago. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any public comment on this item? Please come forward, state your name and address. You'll have 3 minutes per person.
Good afternoon, Planning Commissioners. My name is Steve Luce. I work for Eisenhower Property Group, and Eisenhower Property Group is in the business of building single-family residential subdivisions, and for the last 20 years, that is what we have done. We design, permit, and construct subdivisions primarily in South County, from Ruskin, Riverview, Sun City Center area, and now in the Waimama area. And why this is of substance and of significance to us is that the Planning Commission staff's interpretation of 48.1 essentially puts us out of business in South County. What it does is link rezoning approvals to whether or not there are employment opportunities available in the Waimama downtown area. And I was involved with the community planning process for the Waimama Village Community Plan, which, by the way, was taking the old RP2 plan category that was adopted back in 1990, which allowed any individual rezoning applicant to incorporate into their own land development project their own downtown village commercial and office. And when they decided to move forward with an amendment to RP2, specifically in the Waimama area, the idea was to not have the single-family residential developer build the office and retail, but to bifurcate that type of non-residential development activity and put it in one central location where it may be better, more financially feasible, more marketable to just enhance the development of downtown Waimama. There's no timing mechanism associated with the WVR2 comp plan policies, and that is the way it went forward. And we actually did a rezoning in 2011, right after the WVR2 policies were adopted, where there was no mention of requiring the timing of employment opportunities to be linked with the approval of 600 lots back in 2011. We moved forward as a company with the understanding of exactly how 48.1 was interpreted. We made significant financial business decisions based on our understanding of 48.1, how it could be reasonably interpreted, and move forward with putting roughly 1,000 acres under contract in the Waimama area. And we had one rezoning recently approved for 650 lots, with 350 lots not being specifically approved, but conceptually approved, subject to getting a timing mechanism that additional office and retail be available in downtown Waimama. We have two other rezonings currently in the hopper right now, which are now being subject to this requirement.
Please wrap it up. Your 3 minutes is up.
I'm not to get into the merits of the case, but I want to impress upon you the significance of the 48.1 interpretation and how it is adversely impacting our business plan.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Mike Peterson, 218 Apollo Beach Boulevard. In this capacity for this item, not only was I a participant in the creation of the Waimama Community Plan, but I represent some of the landowner farmers in the area who also thought they knew not only what they did, but how it was going to be dealt with down the road. I understand Mr. Robbins' argument, and technically, what a great way out. Just say it's procedurally missed the deadline. But think about that. Somebody, wasn't Eisenhower, wasn't me, was involved with a rezoning, and the fact is, when it first came forward, it had your staff's complete recommendation of approval, not using any new interpretation that has now arisen. It had the Development Services approval, had the Zoning Hearing Master's approval. But because a commissioner decided they want to reach for a reason to see if they could bounce it back, they pressed a unique new interpretation, and apparently your staff took the bait. So, how are we supposed to know that? The rezoning process goes over here between an applicant and staff and all that sort of stuff. How are we supposed to know when Melissa finally decides that she's going to reinterpret something differently than ever before, and bing, the clock starts running for 20 days when no one else in the public has any idea that this is going on? This is wrong. So as a body, you have an opportunity to go, we appreciate the position. Technically, this is a great move, CYA, for our director and for the board, but it's wrong. And what it does is it now changes a community plan. And as I spoke to you earlier, there's more and more of this starting to happen where we all participate and rely on long-range plans only to have the revolving seats of certain elected officials decide, well, that's not what I would have done, so let's start working at it. And let's find ways. And this particular commission has not only done it with this interpretation, you've probably read that they've gone so far as to declare a moratorium and they're going to work and fix things. Not under the usual community plan review process, not under the comprehensive plan update process, No, we have to quickly have a hurry-up special item. Now, it may have a very similar process, but I can assure you, when these kind of things happen, the landowners who are impacted ought to be told it's happening to them. So then the date can start triggering as to when they ought to appeal when such an interpretation came forward. The merits are all in the letter that you should have before you. Thank you.
Okay. Any other public comment?
Good afternoon. My name is Erin McCormick. Address is 3314 Henderson Boulevard, and I have also filed a rezoning application that's pending right now within the WVR2 plan designated area. This rezoning application, 19-0935, was filed on behalf of Eisenhower Property Group and its landowner, JPL Land Holdings. The requested zoning interpretation will have a direct effect on the rezoning for my client within the area, but for that interpretation of Policy 48-1 related to jobs and commercial development, the project would be supportable. As was pointed out in the request for the zoning interpretation, today's interpretation is not consistent with prior views of its meaning, and there was another rezoning approved in 2010, which did not take this approach. Staff reviews and issues its determination on the zoning request consistency with the comp plan, and in our case, the executive director has also been involved in that review. But ultimately, the comprehensive plan is clear that a zoning interpretation request needs to be addressed by the full Planning Commission if an appeal is filed. I believe the purpose of that is because of the broad range of expertise and community experience embodied by the members of the Planning Commission, and I think it's important for the issues and considerations at stake in this case to have an opportunity to be fairly heard and considered by the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, would the petitioner like to respond?
I do have one.
Attorney Robin.
Prefer to hear mine first? Or
Yep.
would you rather go?
Yeah, Attorney Robin.
Commissioners, I certainly understand, the arguments that council have made, but I have to put those things aside for the legal framework that we're in. And there was a suggestion made that I'd like to clean up here, and that is that there was or might have been some delegation of authority to the Planning Commission in the way the plan language is written, that the Board of County Commissioners made the Planning Commission the final interpreter instead of itself. The plan issue or policy that we're talking about is one of those broad policy guidance issues. It doesn't relate or is not tied to a particular piece of property. It's a broad-based policy. Now, those are legislative decisions that are the territory of the Board of County Commissioners. As such, the board's the legislative body for the county and makes final decisions. Frankly, I don't think if the elected officials wanted to delegate that authority to a body such as the Planning Commission, that they would be able to do that. As you know, under Chapter 97, 351, and Chapter 163, the Planning Commission's powers are limited to those of being in an advisory capacity. And for that reason, I wanted to clean up that particular comment and also confirm it is not only my opinion that the Planning Commission does not have that authority. The county attorney's letter that's at the dais also confirms that position is the county's as well. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. The petitioner? You have 3 minutes to respond.
Again, for the record, Jake Kramer with Stearns Weaver Miller. Well, I promised you that the hearing would have important implications for this commission today. The question is simple. The Hillsborough County gave you the authority to interpret its plan. Are you going to exercise it or not? are you going to do what the county commission asked this commission to do many, many years ago, or not? I'm just reading the plan. I'm not making, I'm not speculating about what the commission meant at the time it wrote and approved this language. I'm just reading the plan. The plan says that for a broad-based interpretation, we have to come request that from the executive director. And when we get the interpretation, if we disagree, we can appeal to this commission. This commission is a diverse body from all over the county. You have many different professions represented here. I'm very comfortable with this commission making the decision. You'll also notice, again, that when the county commission did this, it said that you have to provide a hearing. That's because they wanted public input on the issue. No one's been given public input on this. All we're asking for is a hearing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before I ask the commissioners if they have any questions or comments, I just wanted to reiterate what Attorney Robbins stated at the beginning, that this discussion is regarding the appeal and whether or not it is dismissed or not. So we do, I guess we should probably limit our discussion concerning the merits of the actual interpretation. So,
Yes,
Attorney Robbins?
whether the appeal should be heard. Correct.
Any questions, comments from commissioners? Commissioner Bernstein?
Just a quick question for Mr. Robin, point of clarification, because there were some comments from a number of folks in the audience suggesting that, for lack of a better word, they're victims of timing and circumstance. But am I right to understand your presentation that, setting aside, the technical deficiencies that you were referring to, that it'd be your position that this appeal request should be denied for other grounds as well? I heard themes about usurping the authority of the county commission. So I'm just trying to get a sense, I guess, of whether we're dealing with two separate concerns or one.
Well, to put it bluntly, I think the core issue is the fact that this has already been decided by the final decision maker. For this board to delve into this, you would be asked to either support the executive director's interpretation or determine that her interpretation was incorrect. Either one of those decisions puts you, well, I shouldn't say puts you in that position. It renders any decision on an appellate hearing really an academic decision because of the fact that the matter's already been resolved. And because of that, it is my opinion that the timing for an appeal, the timeliness of an appeal has been preempted and subsumed by the action of the legislative authority, being the Board of County Commissioners.
Thank you.
Okay. Other comments, questions?
I've got a
Commissioner
question.
Cordines?
The 20-day period, when was that supposed to start? Was that supposed to start June 11th?
If you read I don't know if it's not up, yeah, it is up on that screen. The appeal shall be provided in writing to the chairman of the commission within 20 days after the date of the executive director's decision has been rendered. That decision was rendered in June 11th, which was more than 20 days from the time of the initial request for an interpretation, as well as the request for the appeal.
What date was the appeal requested?
The appeal was requested on October 15th, correct.
Any other comments, questions? Commissioner Dix?
Mr. Robin, if we are in agreement that the final arbiter of any decision regarding the comprehensive plan goes to the Board of County Commissioners rather than this body, would not the proper form for this request to review be to request for a rehearing at the Board of County Commissioner rather than coming forth here?
I would agree with that conclusion, Commissioner.
Okay.
I think that is the proper venue. and the appropriate venue for requesting that change.
So that being the case, I guess I would be a little confused as to what would even happen if we heard it and we were to decide to disagree with the interpretation of the executive director. Then there's not even an established procedure for that to go anywhere. So it would seem logical, if what you're saying, the appropriate venue would be before the Board of County Commission. I don't understand what even we would be doing with this item. Is that your understanding?
Is there a question in that?
Yeah, is that your understanding?
Yes, it is.
So if they would have done it inside of the time period, what would have happened? We would have reviewed it, we would have.
Had there
And that would
not,
have been, sorry, that would have been basically just on her interpretation and not actually going against the commission.
well, right, if the Board of County Commissioners hadn't taken matters into their own hands, we'd be following the procedure that's in the plan.
But
Commissioner Dix?
just to follow through with that, Mr. Robin, I want to make sure, even if that had happened, and then we had a hearing, and the hearing would have overruled the interpretation of the executive director, it's your opinion that that would not necessarily hold insofar as an interpretation of the overall plan, that the Board of County Commissioner would still be the final arbiter.
Yeah, it would not be binding on the Board of County Commissioners, correct?
Thanks.
Any other comments, questions? Commissioner Green?
Mr. Chairman, I think I understand what's going on, but I sort of have a little different perspective on this because I see it putting this board in an awkward position to take up this appeal. It seems like this would put us directly at odds with again what has already been decided by the county commission and may in the future create other types of. I mean, this could create a precedent for other types of appeals along the same lines. But I'm not comfortable with the fact that it puts us in a, like I say, in this awkward position with the decisions that have been made by the county commission. So based on that, if there are no other comments, I would make a motion to dismiss this appeal.
Before I see if there's a second, let me just make sure. Are there any other comments or questions from the board? Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Green.
My motion is to dismiss this appeal because it has already been decided, and I don't know, as Mr. Robin has mentioned, I'm not sure what we would benefit from taking this up yet again. It would just go back to the county commission, and again, it would just put us in an awkward position.
Okay, we got a second? A motion by Commissioner Gray and a second by Commissioner Moreno. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion as stated, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Next up on our agenda is item number 12, consultant selection for demographic and market analysis.
Good afternoon, Melissa Zornita, Executive Director. This agenda item is presented to you all to authorize us to select a consultant, WTL plus A, as the consultant for demographic and market analysis related to the Waimama Village Community Plan, the Waimama Village Residential 2 and Residential Plan 2 areas. The consultant contract would be for $77,000. And there was a minor typo in the executive summary on the first page. It still said $70,000. The reason for the increase since what was originally first sent out was that we identified some optional tasks that we would like the consultant potentially to do that would include a second visit, or I take that back, an additional visit to make another presentation, and if we wanted to be inclusive of all of the options in the $77,000. So, as Mr. Collins mentioned in the Ruskin agenda item, the real estate market analysis and that type of work is something that is beyond our staff's internal capabilities. So we typically have been hiring out for these types of work products. The reason that this one is before you is because it exceeds the $35,000 limit that allows for procurement under my approval. Staff followed the process outlined in the Planning Commission policies, section 10.2, with two minor differences that I want to be very transparent about. One, when we started the procurement for this, we thought it would be just for the Waimama area and under the $35,000 limit. As you've heard through the conversations already this afternoon, there's quite a bit of discussion about this land use category as well as the land use category residential planned to, which is just adjacent to it to the north, going up into Balm and Riverview. As the Board of County Commissioners has proceeded in looking at these issues, they have moved forward with initiating moratoriums in both of those areas, and they have requested that our staff, as well as development services with the county, work together on updating these categories. So what we started out with in August was a direction on Waimama, and knowing how important this issue was to the community, we moved quickly to start procuring a consultant to help us with it. Then the RP2 area got added to our plate, given their proximity and given that they deal with very similar assumptions about employment and commercial uses. We would like to have the same consultant do the work for both areas. That is what has increased the budget from the $35,000 that we originally thought to the $77,000. The other piece that because staff in their committee that evaluated the proposals was thinking that this was under section 10.1 of the Planning Commission policies, they did not specifically score each of the criteria that are listed under 10.2.2. In my evaluation and discussion with that staff committee, I believe they considered all of those criteria, but I don't have a specific score sheet showing each individual score. So I just want to be very transparent about how the procurement may deviate slightly from the procedures in your policies. I've reviewed that with Mr. Robin, and he felt comfortable with us coming forward with this in a transparent manner and you all making the final decision. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Any public comment on this item? No public comment. Any questions from commissioners? Commissioner Green?
No. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Melissa, so this work is about to begin, or at some point in the near-term future.
Yes.
What's the time frame?
So the moratoriums that the county is in the process of initiating, they should have their final public hearing on those on December 4th, and they outline a 270-day time frame in which for the moratorium. What we plan to do is have this consultant work on the real estate market analysis, the assumptions that underlie these two categories. Then we will be working with other consultants to go out and do the community meetings in a very brisk fashion because of that time frame. We intend to follow the community plan update process that is established in the guide. There's a guidebook for community planning that our agency did, I think back in 2010-ish. And it outlines a process for updating the community plan with mailed public notice to all property owners at 2 points, at the beginning and the end of the process. But what we've been talking about, particularly for the Waimama area, is using a charrette process to accelerate some of that community input and compress it so that we can achieve the 270-day timeframe.
So the objective is for this work to coincide or culminate with the
Yes, it would feed into the consultant who would be helping us with the charrette. And part of the options that we added in at the end was having this consultant come back and review the recommendations potentially if the recommendations from that charrette process or community input process vary greatly from what this consultant's initial recommendations are. We want them to come back and look at that and give some input on whether or not they're realistic.
Do you foresee any type of, any particular type of planning mechanism that may be necessary to sort of get through this period? I mean, other than putting brimbos on development altogether, those are breaks, guys, if we use it. Okay. Other than the moratorium, let's say. But do you foresee any other type of planning mechanism that may be necessary to get us through that period and then what comes immediately afterwards with regards to this particular area in South County?
Well, I think ultimately we need to revise the language in the comprehensive plan and the community plan to, one, make it clear and address what these sort of consequences of the language that was adopted into the comprehensive plan. I think that can't happen until the community input process occurs, and this is an important input into that, into understanding how these standards, that many of them were set in the 90s, in the mid-2000s for retail and employment, have changed dramatically. And so I think this is really, I'm not sure that there's anything else in the interim that we can do besides get busy and get some input from folks.
Any other questions, comments?
Mine were actually along the lines of Commissioner Green, so I'll just reiterate, I mean, the 270 days is a long time for a moratorium to exist down there, so I just wanted to ask about, your conversations with the consultants, making certain they understand time is of the essence. And
Yes, and we recognize that that time also needs to include, at the end, time for processing of plan amendments, land development code amendments, potentially. So there's another public input process with hearings and of that nature at the end as well.
Any other public comment? Oh, not public comment. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Okay, someone like to make a motion?
I'll move to approve the request as modified most recently to engage consultant at the higher threshold.
Okay, got a motion by Commissioner Bernstein, second by Commissioner Green. Any further discussion before we vote? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to our item number 13. Yes. Executive Director's report.
Thank you. Good afternoon again, Melissa Zornita, Executive Director. At your seats, there should be two things. One, the Executive Director's report, which outlines some highlights of activities that I or staff have participated in. One of the major activities, besides being involved in Waimama and RP2 discussions, has been that there was a workshop with the Board of County Commissioners on October 24th. And one of the things that was handed out at that workshop was this attachment that I have had placed at your seats as well. So there have been a number of major projects that your staff, as well as the county staff, have been working on towards updating the comprehensive plan. And a number of these were presented to the Board of County Commissioners at their October 24th workshop. We got some really valuable input and direction from them on things that they want to see pursued further, areas that we might do some more research and outreach on, as well as some just general feedback that we need to get going on updating the comp plan, which we're all on board about doing. So it was a very beneficial workshop to move us forward in that regard. One thing in particular that was requested of the Planning Commission at that workshop was that there be some additional outreach in the unincorporated area related to growth and development and infrastructure. And specifically, Commissioner Merman made that request, and the other commissioners were all in concurrence that we do a multi-layered outreach that would include not only some web-based surveys or broad-based surveys like we've done in the past, but also some perhaps some focus groups, some perhaps a statistically significant survey to really gauge beyond just the people who might show up at a public meeting or who might be more apt because they care about these things a lot to log in on the computer, but also to reach sort of the everyday folks who are busy and get a barometer on how they're feeling about some of these issues. So we are working with the county on an approach. I owe the Board of County Commissioners a scope on what that would look like for their second meeting in December, which I believe is December 18th. So the direction also was that outreach take place generally in the first quarter of 2020. So that also is an aggressive timeline, and we're going to be busy. So I just wanted to mention that as a highlight. I also wanted to mention, it's come up in a couple of agenda items that we haven't really had staff to do real estate and market analysis and some of this demographic analysis. And that hasn't gone unnoticed to me that has been the most frequent consultant contract that we've had. So we are pleased to share that we have hired a manager for economic and demographic and research. Yasser Gonzalez will be starting in December. He comes to us from the St. John's Water Management District. He previously worked at the Southwest Florida Water Management District in an economist role for both of those organizations. So we're thrilled to be able to start to bring some of those capabilities in-house to the Planning Commission. So I wanted to mention that. Lastly, wanted to mention that your staff is all over at 700 Twigs. Feel free to come visit. It's a different space than the 18th floor. But we're making do. We'll be there for about 6 to 8 weeks, so if anybody from the public needs us, there are signs on the 18th floor to direct them over to us there. The Planning Commission meeting in December is going to be held on the second floor in the BOCC chambers. That meeting will start at 3 p.m. We will be having a Public Information Committee meeting, which is the committee that, for those who are new planning commissioners, I don't know that I described in our orientation the committees that the board has, but that committee focuses on some of our larger outreach efforts like the awards program, our Future Leaders in Planning program. Some of those things have come through the Public Information Committee as ideas. So we'll be having a meeting of that group at 2 o'clock on the 15th floor to debrief about the awards program that occurred at the end of October. That concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Melissa? Commissioner Dix?
In the meeting schedule for next year?
Oh, yes. Thank you for reminding me. I apologize.
No, that's fine. But looks like June 15th and November 16th, those aren't the second Mondays?
I'll have to look at a calendar. Hold on.
No, that's fine. I mean, One was like that this year, but we had a reason. It was Veterans Day, I think, this month. But my calendar just automatically populates. That's how I knew the second Monday deal.
You're correct. It should be June 8th.
So you think we're going to have it June 8th versus?
Yeah, we should update that. And if November 9th is not, that does not appear to be Veterans Day?
11th is the Veterans Day.
Right. So,
Although the county may celebrate it, I don't know. I mean, how they, it's
No,
it's always the 11th, but they sometimes celebrate things on Mondays.
I think they follow federal guidelines, holidays.
yes, no, we celebrate Veterans Day on the day of Veterans Day as a county holiday. So that is correct. It should be June 8th and November 9th.
I don't mean to.
Thank you for catching that.
No, don't blame me for being a nitpicker. It's Siri. You know?
She's
what was
helpful
wrong.
sometimes. Yes, so are there any other changes to the meeting calendar? If there aren't any, then with your concurrence, I will have Sharon send out Outlook schedulers to all of you all to reserve those dates on your calendars. Thank you.
Thank you.
Melissa, one
Questions? Yeah, sorry, I was going to ask.
Fowler Avenue land use study. Now, is this isn't the same study that Pedro completed?
It is,
It is?
yes.
Okay.
It goes in the county and in the city. Well, both cities, actually. Temple
But
Terrace and-
it doesn't go into Temple Terrace or that far east?
They looked at the area, but Temple Terrace has not, has expressed that they don't want to see any changes in land use in that area. So we've really focused on the area west of the university to 275 for future land use changes to make the county and the city's land use in those areas match. Bring them to a similar category, because right now it's very difficult for developers because they've got split land use categories on many of the parcels there.
Okay, now this says it was phase one was a background report, so will there be a follow-up phase of some type?
Yet the report actually made some recommendations at the end, which we are moving forward with, working with the city and the county on implementing. Those are mostly looking for both text and map changes to the future land use map regarding the land use categories to better articulate the vision for the corridor.
Okay, any other comments, questions for Melissa? Okay, thank you. We will move on to other business. First up, chair's business. I did want to mention, Melissa mentioned the ad hoc committees. We have the Public Information Committee and the Budget Committee. Currently, we have myself and Cody Powell signed up for the Public Information Committee. On the Budget Committee, we have Cody, myself, and Nigel signed up. I would like to ask or just ask you all to consider joining one of them, or if you're interested. But like I said, the Public Information Committee handles the awards dinner, which we have annually. We just had it late October, and they're involved in planning for that and other items. And in the Budget Committee, we meet a few times during the year to discuss the budget. So I'd encourage anyone who's interested to please sign up or let Melissa know that you're interested. Or you can tell us now, so. Okay, that's all I have for chair's business. Any other old business? Any new business?
I won't
Mr.
be
Marino.
at the tonight's public hearing.
Okay.
I will be at Alto time.
Okay, thank you. Any committee reports?
None for me. Earlier, Rick Richmond's report was adequately summarized the appeal board meeting.
Okay.
It's pretty simple, too.
Okay, thank you. Well, given that, that's the rest of our meeting. We do have a public hearing at 5:30. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
24th.